This is the heartwarming story of a 20-year-old Kenyan woman on the verge of becoming an undocumented immigrant in the United States who finds love with a 60-year-old farm owner she meets on a highland potato farm in Idaho. It is a tale of how she becomes pregnant with his child and the life they build together. Before we begin, please subscribe and like this video. It is a great help to us. Somewhere in the Rocky Mountains of Idaho, where the rugged peaks scrape the sky, lay Silas Blackwood's kingdom. It was a place over 6,000 feet up a dizzying height where the time of the world below seemed to slow. Here, a cool breeze wrapped around the valley even in summer, and in winter, a blade-like wind licked the mountain ridges. His potato field, sprawling vast, as if it were the first field under heaven, would often see the shadows of clouds drift slowly across its furrows. The Blackwood russet potato grown here was no ordinary crop, forged by the large daily temperature swings and the volcanic soil. Its firm texture and deep earthy flavor were spoken of like legend among chefs across the country. His name was a seal of guarantee for the highest quality potatoes. He was born on this barren yet honest land, breathing its pine and earth scent his entire life. His wife, who had followed him from afar to this mountain life, far from the clamor of the city, had withered away from the unfamiliar environment and arduous life leaving the world before him. In his memory, she always had a faint smile waiting for him on the edge of the porch swing as he returned from the fields. It had been over a decade since she passed. Their only son, eager to escape the suffocating mountains, had left for the city of Boise without a second thought upon graduating high school and was now a respectable middle-aged head of his own family. But an invisible deep chasm had formed between father and son. The son would visit only on holidays, saying like a broken record, "Dad, please stop this back-breaking farming and come live with us." Silas's reply was always the same. "I like it here. This is the only place I'll bury my bones." His voice was steeped in a stubbornness as deep and solid as the mountains themselves. His house was a perfect reflection of the years he had lived and the character of its owner. A classic log cabin built from thick, decades-old ponderosa pine. It lacked artificial charm, but stood unshaken against wind, rain, and snow on the mountainside. Its rough wooden walls, having absorbed the traces of time, had turned a deep, rich brown. In summer, they held a cool chill, making one forget the heat, and in winter, the thick walls and stone fireplace blocked the fierce winds. Stepping inside a mixture of old wood, faint earth, and the smell of burning pine from the hearth created a strange sense of stability. His worldly possessions consisted of little more than an old, heavy cedar chest, a dusty television, and a worn armchair where he drank whiskey alone at night, his only companion in solitude. In the middle of a wall hung the only black and white photograph of him and his wife, from their youth, faded within a simple wooden frame. He rarely looked at it like a man deliberately avoiding a deep wound in his heart that might crumble at the slightest touch. A certain part of the wooden floor from his chair to the window was worn smooth and shiny. Outside, the layered mountain ridges changing their clothes with each season, and the potato fields he had tilled his whole life stretched out like a painting. He seemed most at peace when gazing at this view. Yet within that tranquility lay a deep shadow of solitude that no one could breach. By any measure, he was a rich man. The potato farm alone earned him more than a comfortable upper-middle-class salary. Not only that, but the vast forests inherited from his ancestors were teeming with valuable mushrooms and wild huckleberries. His influence in the local community, gained from several terms as head of the local farmers' co-op, was not to be ignored. Yet he seemed detached from his wealth and honor. His only interests appeared to be the land, the potatoes, and the ever-changing sky. Before the deep blue of pre-dawn faded, he would rise without fail and head to the fields. He would check if anything had happened overnight, brushing the dew-kissed potato leaves and gauging the soil's moisture and temperature with his fingertips. All day he worked silently in the earth. His hands, long calloused, were rough as tree bark, and his sun and wind-beaten face was etched with wrinkles like deep canyons. But his eyes, as he looked down upon his fields, were always sharp and alive. He seemed to understand the language of the land. The townsfolk respected him, but also found him difficult. They called him the Old Man of the Mountain, or just Stubborn Old Silas. While everyone acknowledged his farming skills and honesty, his taciturn nature and extreme aversion to interacting with others meant no one could easily approach him. He rarely showed up at town events, and seldom came down the mountain unless absolutely necessary. Except for the bustling harvest season, when he needed extra hands, only the deep silence of the mountains hung heavily over his vast farm and large log cabin. Whether it was a solitude of his own choosing or the result of a falling out with the world, the line was blurry. But as night deepened and he sat alone with his glass of whiskey, his broad but lonely back cast an even darker shadow in the moonlight, wringing the hearts of those who saw it. The shadow felt at times like a mountain spirit, at others like a lost soul. On the other side of the world, in a village on the outskirts of Nairobi, Kenya, where small tin-roofed houses huddled together beside dusty, unpaved roads, Njeri was born and raised. At 23, her dark skin glowed with a healthy sheen, and her large eyes sparkled with curiosity and life. Raised under the hot African sun, she was poor, but poverty had not managed to steal her bright laughter or positive spirit. The heavy burden of her younger siblings' school fees and her sick parents' medicine rested on her shoulders, but she held a simple yet desperate dream to one day overcome these hardships on her own and open a small clothing store in her hometown. Then one day, a recruiter appeared in the village, whispering to her the sweet illusion of the American dream. He spun tales of learning new skills and earning big money with a work visa for agricultural labor. Just a few years of hard work, he claimed, and she could build a fine house back home. Njeri hesitated, but for the sake of her family's future and her own dream, she decided to bet everything on this risky gamble. Gathering the family's meager assets and borrowing money from relatives, she handed it all to the recruiter and boarded a flight to America, her heart swelling with hope. A mix of fear of the unknown and excitement for a new life coexisted within her. But the moment she landed at the airport, her fantasy began to shatter. The man who met her was different than before, and the place she was assigned was not the modern farm she had been promised, but a remote industrial hog farm in the flatlands of Nebraska. The farm owner, a man named Bert, was a greedy and violent man. On her very first day, he took her passport and visa documents, locking them away. He paid her less than half the wage stipulated in her contract and forced her to work from dawn till late at night in subhuman conditions. She slept on a cot in a collapsing, foul-smelling trailer with other workers from different countries, all in similarly precarious situations. Her meals consisted of thin soup and stale bread. When drunk, Bert would habitually spew verbal abuse and treated the foreign workers as less than human. Even more terrifying was the fact that he began to eye Njeri with a lecherous gaze, making advances. Every night, Njeri cried in fear and despair. This was not the America she had dreamed of. She wanted to escape, but with no passport and no money, she was helpless. Then, one night, a few Mexican workers in the same situation secretly planned an escape. Njeri gathered her courage and fled the hellish farm with them. With their help, she managed to grab only a small amount of money and a single bag. Her heart pounded as if it would burst as she ran breathless through the pitch-dark night. The fear of being caught crushed her. Where could she go now? She was lost. She knew no one had nothing to rely on. The money she had would be gone after a few bus rides. She got on a bus heading west, further and further west, without a destination. She vaguely remembered a coworker once saying that Idaho had many high mountains and was sparsely populated making it a good place to hide. She also harbored a sliver of hope that she might find a job. After several days of sleeping fitfully in bus stations or under bridges, surviving on a single piece of bread a day, she drifted into the deep mountains of Idaho. But the unfamiliar land and rugged terrain brought her a new kind of despair. She completely lost her sense of direction in the winding mountain roads. To make matters worse, the fickle weather of a summer mountain descended upon her. The sky suddenly darkened and a downpour began. Her thin t-shirt was instantly soaked, and though it was summer, the night temperature in the high-altitude mountains dropped rapidly. A chill that pierced her bones, days of hunger, and the intense fear of Bert's men catching her at any moment, her consciousness began to fade. "Is this how I die, Mom? My siblings?" Her vision went black. Just then, through the sheets of rain, a faint light leaking from a mountainside far away entered her blurred vision. Was it the last instinct of survival? She crawled almost slithering toward that light. She fell and rolled down the steep rain-slicked path several times, but she couldn't give up. By the time she finally reached a huge log cabin, her remaining strength was completely gone. She reached the front porch, and as she raised a trembling hand to knock on the wooden door, she lost consciousness and collapsed onto the cold, rain-soaked floorboards. A liquid, whether rain or tears, flowed endlessly down her dark cheeks. How much time had passed? To a low voice and the sensation of someone shaking her, Njeri slowly opened her eyes. Her whole body felt heavy as lead, and a terrible chill was accompanied by a burning fever. Through her blurry vision, she saw an unfamiliar wooden ceiling, and then the face of a gruff-looking old man looking down at her. It was Silas Blackwood. He had been on his way back from a final look at his fields at dusk when he found this strange woman collapsed on his doorstep. At first he thought it was a body, and his heart sank, but after confirming a faint breath, he had quickly carried her inside. His face was a complex mixture of bewilderment at this absurd situation, suspicion towards the uninvited guest, and a very faint flicker of compassion that any human might feel. "You awake!" A low, deep voice rumbled in her ear. Njeri looked at him with terrified eyes and instinctively recoiled. She had no idea where she was, who this man was, or what would happen to her now. Silas let out a deep sigh at her reaction. He was at a loss as to what to do with this troublesome being that had suddenly rolled into his quiet life. But he was not so heartless as to throw a woman shivering and feverish on a summer night back out into the wind and rain. Without a word, he went to the kitchen, quickly heated some broth on the stove, and brought the steaming mug and a wet cloth. He placed them brusquely in front of Njeri and said curtly, "Drink." His voice was still laced with caution, but the act itself was the first taste of human warmth she had experienced since setting foot in America. All night, Njeri groaned in pain. In her fever and chills, the faces of her family back home and the cruel face of Bert flickered alternately in her mind. She screamed in her nightmares and cried out in Swahili, a language he couldn't understand. From his room, Silas heard it all, spending a sleepless night. He could have just ignored her, but he found he couldn't. Several times he went out to the main room, where she lay, replaced the cold cloth on her forehead, and even forced some aspirin crushed in water down her throat. Perhaps, thanks to his clumsy nursing by dawn, Njeri's fever had miraculously broken. When the first birds began to sing, Silas prepared to go to the fields as usual. Dressed in his work clothes and boots, he approached the still sleeping Njeri. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should wake her, but he couldn't let her stay here forever. In a slightly softer voice, he shook her awake. "Miss, wake up. It's morning, you should go now. You feelin' better, I'll call the sheriff for you. Go and tell them your situation." At Silas's words, Njeri startled awake. The word sheriff made her face turn pale again. She shot up from the couch, fell to the floor, and grabbed Silas's pant leg. "No, please, not the police. Never. If they catch me, I'm finished. Please, I'm begging you. Let me work here. I'll do anything. Just a place to sleep and food to eat is all I need. The money. You can pay me very, very little. It's okay." Fat teardrops streamed relentlessly from her eyes, and her desperate English, though broken, was filled with all her desperation. Silas was taken aback. He had never in his life seen someone plead so desperately before him. He swallowed hard and hesitated. Harboring an undocumented person was a serious crime. If he were caught, the reputation he had built his entire life and his very livelihood could crumble in an instant. But he couldn't ignore the look in this young woman's eyes as she cried out before him. For a moment, he even had the illusion that he was seeing his sick wife from long ago pleading with tears in her eyes that she wanted to live. And practically speaking, his vast potato fields were desperately short of hands right now. Trying to hide his complex feelings, he let out a deep sigh. "You can really do anything. The work here is much harder than it looks. I don't know if a young lady like you can handle it." Silas finally spoke. His voice was still low and blunt, but the earlier coldness had thawed slightly. Jerry's head snapped up. A glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. "Yes. Yes, really. I've done hard work in Africa too. Just tell me what to do. I won't complain. I'll work hard." She cried out desperately, as if she had grabbed a lifeline. Silas stared at Njeri's face for a moment. Her eyes were not lying. As if he had finally made up his mind, he said curtly, "Fine. Then work for just one day. If I see you're not cut out for it, you leave tomorrow. But there are conditions. You are not to take a single step off this property without my permission. And if you cause any trouble or do anything to displease me, you'd better believe you won't leave this mountain alive. Got it?" His words were still threatening, but within them was the intention to accept her. "Yes. Yes, I'll remember. I will never disappoint you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you." Njeri was overjoyed, nodding her head again and again. And so the precarious and tense cohabitation or employment of Silas and Njeri began. Silas cleared out an old dusty tack room in the barn, long unused, and gave it to Njeri as her sleeping quarters. The room was small, dark, and a draft made it chilly at night. But to Njeri, compared to the last few days of sleeping on the streets or the horrific trailer at the previous farm, it was like a palace. At least here she could escape the wind and rain, and she could lock the door and sleep without anxiety. She took the few old wool blankets and a pillow Silas had tossed her, and made a small sanctuary for herself in a corner of the barn. The next morning, Njeri woke up before Silas and went out to the fields. The damp, dark soil of Idaho was completely different from the hot, dry earth of Africa. The hoe Silas gave her was heavier than she expected, and harvesting the potatoes buried deep in the ground made her back ache as if it would break. The hoe blade quickly dulled on the numerous rocks, and the tough weeds seemed endless, no matter how many she pulled. The farming techniques she had learned in Kenya were almost useless here. Blisters quickly formed on her palms, burst and bled. Her muscles screamed in protest, but Njeri gritted her teeth and endured. The desperation of having nowhere else to go if she were kicked out, and a sense of gratitude and apology towards Silas for giving her this last chance sustained her. She sweated silently and desperately. Even when the hot summer sun beat down mercilessly on her dark skin, or when a sudden downpour soaked her to the bone, she didn't utter a single word of complaint. Silas watched her from a distance. At first, he was just waiting to see how long she would last, but as time went on, he began to be surprised by her tenacity and sincerity. The young people from the city would run away after less than a day of this grueling labor, but this seemingly frail African girl was doing it without a word. Of course, her technique was terrible, but he could feel that her will to learn and her passion to work were genuine. He still barely spoke to her, but a subtle change began to appear in his attitude. When he saw her hoeing in an awkward posture, he would shout gruffly, "Use your legs, not your back. Let the tool do the work. But it wasn't just nagging, it was his own way of teaching her the ropes. When she struggled to move a heavy sack of potatoes, he would walk over without a word and lift it for her. At mealtimes, he would set a plate for her at his own table. The food was still just stew bread and a few vegetables from the garden, but it was at this table that Njeri could finally eat with a peaceful heart. A day, 2 days, then a week passed. An awkward silence still flowed between them, but within that silence, something invisible was slowly building. It was like a tiny sprout of trust blooming in the space where the wariness of a stranger had faded. Njeri began to discover the clumsy but human side hidden behind Silas's gruff exterior. He spoke harshly, but he always provided the promised meals and a place to sleep. He warned her to be careful when he was operating the tractor and told her to bolt her door securely at night. Silas, too, was slowly getting used to Njeri's presence. At first, she was just a bothersome and annoying intruder, but now he began to see her as an individual, a person who sweated silently by his side. Her broken English, the incomprehensible songs she sometimes hummed, and her refusal to lose her smile even when exhausted and in pain, these things were slowly, very slowly knocking on the door of his closed heart. In a remote mountain hollow in Idaho, the strange and perilous cohabitation of an old American man and a young African woman was beginning to flow in a direction no one could have predicted. Time flowed slowly but distinctly, like the seasons in the mountains. Njeri gradually adapted to life in the Idaho mountains and the arduous work of potato farming. Her hands became as rough as Silas's, but her skill with the farm tools became quite adept. Silas no longer watched her every move, as if monitoring her. Sometimes he would even entrust an entire section of the field to her. Their conversations remained short and simple, but the sharp vigilance of before was gone. As they repeatedly sweated together, ate while silently gazing at the same scenery, an indescribable kind of bond, or perhaps a sense of camaraderie, was forming between them. Then came one early autumn evening. After a long, hard day in the fields, they sat facing each other at the dinner table. Njeri's expression was unusually dark, and she was silent. Since she was usually one to chatter away, even when tired, Silas grew concerned. He stopped eating and asked casually, "Something wrong?" Njeri hesitated for a moment, then shook her head with a faint smile. "No, I'm fine. It's just, I was thinking of home today." Her voice was slightly choked. "In Kenya around this time, my family would all gather to make ugali and sukuma wiki. It's a stiff porridge made from cornmeal and sautéed collard greens. I miss the taste of my mom's cooking so much." She spoke softly, gazing at a distant point. A deep homesickness flickered in her dark eyes. Silas said nothing and just ate his food. He was a man unskilled at empathizing with or comforting others. But that night, he couldn't sleep, tossing and turning for a long time. Njeri's lonely expression and the phrase, "the taste of my mom's cooking," wouldn't leave his mind. He had almost no experience cooking for someone else in his entire life. When his wife was alive, he ate the food she made, and after she died, he just threw things together to fill his stomach. But strangely, he felt an impulse to make that unfamiliar dish Njeri was longing for. It could have been pity, or perhaps a desire not to see her sad eyes anymore. Or maybe from a very deep place, it was an unconscious desire to advance his relationship with her by doing something meaningful for her. That night, Silas turned on his old computer and with clumsy fingers began to search the internet. Kenya food ugali recipe. How to make sukuma wiki. The screen filled with names of ingredients and cooking methods he had never seen before. Where could he get cornmeal? He wrestled with the screen for hours, scribbling the necessary information onto a memo pad. The next day, he made a big decision and drove down to the town. It was a place he visited maybe once or twice a month. He went to the supermarket buying cornmeal collard greens and a few spices from the recipe. This behavior felt strange and awkward even to himself, but he also felt a sense of pride and excitement. That night, after Njeri was asleep, Silas began his secret operation in the kitchen. He fumbled through the recipe on his memo pad and carefully started cooking. Getting the ratio of cornmeal to water right was a challenge from the start. It became too watery or too stiff several times. He failed to control the heat and burned the bottom of the pot. When sautéing, the greens oil splattered everywhere, nearly burning his arm. There was a heart-stopping moment when he almost cut his finger with his clumsy knife skills. His rough, coarse hands were far from suited for delicate cooking. He swore under his breath and thought of giving up several times, but each time the memory of Njeri's sad eyes from that afternoon made him refocus. After struggling in the kitchen well past midnight, he finally completed a plausible-looking ugali and sukuma wiki. Of course, even to his eyes, it was far from perfect, and he couldn't guarantee the taste. But he had done his best. The next evening, at the dinner table, Silas, trying to act casual, placed the food he had made overnight in front of Njeri: steaming white ugali and greenish sautéed greens. Seeing it, Njeri stopped breathing for a moment. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Is this ugali and sukuma wiki?" she asked in a trembling voice, looking at Silas. Silas avoided her gaze and cleared his throat. "You said yesterday you wanted to eat it. I was in town and saw the ingredients, so I just tried making it. It's my first time, so I don't know if you'll like it." He tried to sound as nonchalant as possible, but the tips of his ears were slightly red. With a trembling hand, Njeri took a fork, took a small piece of ugali and greens, and brought it to her mouth. She chewed slowly. She closed her eyes. Her expression was hard to describe. A moment later, fat tears began to fall from her dark eyes. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and a deep, indescribable emotion. Honestly, the taste was different from the deep flavor of her mother's cooking. The cornmeal was less savory, and the greens were a bit salty. But in that food, she could feel Silas's clumsy but warm heart, his sincere effort to comfort her. It was the first genuine comfort she had felt since coming to America. "It's delicious. Sob. It's really, really delicious, sir," she said, choking back tears. Those tears seemed to melt away even the last remaining wall of awkwardness between them. The dinner table was quiet for a long time that evening, but the silence was no longer cold or awkward. In its place, a clumsy warmth and a quiet understanding and compassion for each other were blooming. After that day, Silas's late-night cooking continued like a secret ritual. He asked Njeri more about Kenyan food, and she excitedly told him about various dishes: githeri, a stew of corn and beans; nyama choma, grilled meat; chapati, a flatbread. Sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, Silas steadily honed his Kenyan cooking skills. The unfamiliar African dishes made by his rough hands became an indispensable part of their dinner table. The exotic smell of spices and the clattering sound of a clumsy cook wafting from the kitchen of the mountain log cabin each night became a warm language of communion, connecting the two lonely souls. While their relationship was slowly changing, like thawing ground, a sinister energy was stirring in the world below. The vicious farm owner Bert, who had lost Njeri after treating her like a slave, was consumed by anger and obsession. To him, Njeri was more than just a loss of labor. It was the humiliation of her daring to escape his control and the anxiety that his illegal activities might be exposed that made him even more vicious. He mobilized all his connections and unsavory channels to track her down. He was hell-bent on finding her, contacting other farm owners, and even putting out word with a cash reward. Finally, his persistent net caught a piece of information. Njeri was hiding in a remote mountain hollow in Idaho on the farm of an old man named Silas Blackwood. A cruel smile spread across Bert's face. I'll show that girl what a terrible price she'll pay for escaping my grasp. He planned to either drag Jerry back and subjugate her more harshly than before, or report her to ICE and have her deported as an example. Another shadow of threat was rising from a much closer place, the neighboring property. A young farmer named Travis, who had lived in the area for generations, was always in debt due to his lack of skill and laziness. He had a twisted personality, blaming others for his failures. His jealousy and inferiority complex towards Silas, who had achieved great wealth through a lifetime of diligent farming and was respected in the community, were pathologically deep. Silas's vast fertile land, his successful harvests every year, and his quiet wealth, all of it, was an eyesore to Travis. Then, when rumors spread that Silas had taken in a young, pretty foreign woman of unknown origin to live with him, Travis's envy reached its peak. Has that old geezer lost his mind? That foreign woman must be a gold digger. He indulged in all sorts of vile fantasies and waited for a chance to bring Silas down. He began spreading malicious rumors about Silas and Jerry and started plotting to secretly sabotage Silas's farm. One afternoon, while Silas was briefly in town, two rough-looking men appeared at the entrance of his farm. They were men sent by Bert. Pretending to be lost hunters, they loitered around the farm and approached Jerry, who was working alone in the fields. "Miss, you know where Old Man Blackwood's place is." Jerry froze at the appearance of the strange men, but tried to act calm and pointed towards Silas's cabin. The men studied her face and smiled slyly. "Thanks, miss. You're a real pretty thing." Their blatant stares gave Jerry a foreboding feeling. After the men left, she felt her heart pounding like crazy. Who were they? Could they be people sent by Bert? Filled with anxiety, she cautiously told Silas what had happened that day. Silas's expression hardened instantly. He instinctively knew it was Bert's doing. "From tomorrow, you are never to go out to the fields alone, and no matter what, do not leave this property. Understand?" His voice held an unprecedented gravity and anger. That night, he took out an old hunting rifle from a locked cabinet, dusted it off, and cleaned it, preparing for the worst. To make matters worse, Travis's vile sabotage began in earnest. In the dead of night, he secretly dammed the irrigation ditch that flowed into Silas's potato field, diverting the water towards his own. The next morning, when Silas discovered a part of his field drying up, he was furious. He had a strong suspicion of who did it, but with no proof, he could only burn with frustration. A few days later, a part of the barbed wire fence around Silas's farm was found cut with wire cutters. It was a fence to keep out elk and deer. If wild animals got into the fields and ruined the crops, it would be a huge loss. Silas gritted his teeth as he repaired the fence. "It must be that bastard Travis. I can't just let this go." He trembled with rage at Travis's depravity. But at the same time, he felt a complex mix of emotions about all these unfortunate events that had started since Jerry's presence became known. A more realistic and urgent problem than all these external threats was Jerry's legal status. The temporary humanitarian parole she had been granted was about to expire. The Immigration Office, USCIS, had notified them that no further extensions were possible, and that if she did not obtain a formal status of stay, she would immediately face deportation proceedings. Silas frequented the county offices and drove for hours to the regional USCIS office, trying to go through the process of legally sponsoring Jerry as a farm worker. But the required documents were a mountain, the procedures were strict, and the officials were indifferent. As a last resort, he went to see Dr. Evans in the town. Dr. Evans was the local doctor, highly respected and well-connected. Silas, uncharacteristically swallowing his pride, honestly confessed in Jerry's pitiful situation and his own desperation. Dr. Evans, known for being a man of principle, felt deep compassion for Silas's sincere plea and the suffering Jerry must have endured. He promised that while he couldn't do anything illegal, he would do his best on a humanitarian level. He gave Njeri a thorough health checkup and carefully wrote a medical affidavit stating that she was suffering from extreme post-traumatic stress and malnutrition and required humanitarian consideration. How much power that one document would have was unknown, but to Silas it was a hope like rain in a drought. Watching Silas go through all this trouble and danger for her sake, Njeri's heart felt like it was being torn to shreds. She felt a deep sense of guilt, as if she had barged into his peaceful life and ruined everything. Every night she would curl up in a corner of her room in the barn and cry silently. "I have to leave. If I just disappear, all these problems will be solved." She resolved to run away several times, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She couldn't turn her back on Silas, who was fighting with all his might to protect her and his clumsy but sincere heart. "Sir, you're having such a hard time because of me. I should just leave. I think that's the best way for you." One night, Njeri finally managed to say through her tears. Silas quietly wrapped an arm around her shoulder. His hand was still rough, but it held more comfort and strength than any words. "Don't say such weak things. You think I can't protect one person, you're not alone anymore. We'll get through this together. I will never let you go alone." His low, firm voice held onto Njeri's anxious heart. In the deep of night, in a small room in a barn, the two shared their wounds and fears, trying desperately not to let go of the precarious thread of hope. The storm of trials was growing ever fiercer, but paradoxically in that storm, their hearts were being bound even more tightly together. Bert's persistence was beyond imagination. He practically set up a base of operations in a nearby town, waiting for an opportunity. He chose a more cunning and vicious method than direct confrontation. He anonymously filed several tips with ICE reporting Njeri as an undocumented immigrant and sent letters to the Department of Labor alleging that Silas was illegally employing and harboring her. He even tried to bribe a journalist to write a malicious article framing Silas as a vicious farmer exploiting migrant workers. His goal was not just to torment Njeri, but to tarnish Silas's social reputation and completely isolate him. These movements inevitably reached the ears of Hazel, who ran the town's general store and served as its unofficial information hub. She happened to overhear one of Bert's hired men boasting in town and immediately informed Silas. "Silas, that man Bert, is a real piece of work. He's determined to ruin you and that girl. He was talking about going to the papers and all sorts of things. I don't think you can just sit back and do nothing." Hazel raised her voice, outraged, as if it were her own business. Silas realized he had no more room to retreat. He decided to confront Bert's conspiracy head-on. First, he asked Dr. Evans for help. Dr. Evans wrote a detailed notarized affidavit about the abuse and exploitation his patient Njeri had suffered at the previous farm, and even expressed his willingness to testify in court if necessary. Furthermore, through Hazel, Silas tracked down other migrant workers who had fled or been mistreated by Bert. At first, they were hesitant, fearing retaliation, but with Silas's sincere persuasion and promise of protection, they found the courage to provide their own statements about Bert's illegal activities. Silas gathered all this evidence and testimony and handed it over to a lawyer his son had found for him in Boise. He was no longer on the defensive. He was preparing to countersue Bert for labor trafficking, human rights abuses, and intimidation. Meanwhile, Travis's sabotage did not stop. He grew bolder, attempting to slash the tires on Silas's tractor or vandalizing other farm equipment. This time, Silas did not just take it. On his lawyer's advice, he secretly installed trail cameras around the farm. A few days later, just as he expected, Travis was caught on camera trying to pry open the door of the equipment shed in the middle of the night. The next morning, Silas took the footage and went to see Travis. Faced with undeniable proof, Travis's face turned white and he was speechless. "Now what? Should I take this to the sheriff, or should we end it here?" Silas asked coldly. Travis fell to his knees and began to beg. "Silas, Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry I was wrong. I'll never ever do it again. Please forgive me just this once." Silas looked down at Travis's pathetic form with contempt. He could have had him legally punished, but he chose not to. Instead, he warned him sternly. "I'll let it go this once, but if you ever lay a single finger on my farm or my people again, there will be no mercy, and you will confess what you did to the folks at the next town meeting and apologize." Travis nodded, tears streaming down his face. A few days later, at the town hall meeting, Travis confessed his wrongdoing in front of the gathered people and publicly apologized to Silas and Neri. With this incident, Travis completely lost his standing in the community and no longer dared to bother Silas. At the center of all this turmoil was always Njeri. She was tormented watching the series of events unfold because of her. But at the same time, she felt a deep sense of gratitude and emotion seeing Silas and the people helping him fight for her. She was especially comforted to see Silas's son, who had initially been so distant, hire a lawyer and actively get involved in his father's affairs. Silas's son came to see Njeri personally and apologized clumsily but sincerely. "Ma'am, this is still awkward, but I'm truly sorry for misunderstanding my father and for thinking poorly of you. I've never seen my dad go to such lengths for someone before. I truly hope you two will be happy." His sincere words brought tears to Njeri's eyes. The storm had not yet completely passed, but a ray of hope was beginning to shine through it. The solidarity of those helping Silas and Njeri grew stronger, and their sincerity was slowly melting even the cold prejudices of the world. Bert's evil deeds only hastened his downfall, and Travis's conspiracy ended with his miserable confession. Now, the biggest hurdle that remained was obtaining legal status for Njeri. Silas Njeri and those helping them were waiting for the final decision from USCIS, pinning their last hopes on it. In their hearts, alongside anxiety, was a firm faith and love born from the experience of overcoming trials. After a long and anxious wait, a call finally came from the lawyer. The result was nothing short of a miracle. Njeri was granted humanitarian parole, and they were informed that if her marriage to Silas Blackwood, a U.S. citizen, was legally recognized, she would be on a clear path to a green card. Dr. Evans' medical affidavit, the petition from the townsfolk led by Hazel, and the legal pressure from the lawyer had all played a decisive role. Above all, it was the result of the suffering Njeri had endured, and Silas's sincere protective will moving the hearts of the officials. Silas and Njeri held each other and wept tears of joy. It felt as if all the hardship and heartache had been washed away in an instant. With the biggest obstacle gone, Silas had no reason to hesitate any longer. That evening, he took Njeri's hand and led her to a hill overlooking the potato fields he had tilled his entire life. The sky was turning a fiery orange as the sun began to set, and a cool autumn breeze brushed against them. Silas looked deep into Njeri's eyes and with a trembling voice spoke from the heart. "Njeri, will you officially become my wife?" His voice, instead of its usual gruffness, was filled with deep respect, affection, and a desperate longing to build a future together. "Before I met you, I thought it was natural for me to live alone in these vast mountains. I had resigned myself to the fact that my life was already in its twilight. But when you appeared, everything changed. Your laughter brought life to this silent valley, and your warm heart melted my frozen one. Eating with you, tilling the fields with you, and weathering these trials with you, I felt alive again. You are the miracle, the gift that came into my barren life. A life without you has no meaning to me now. Please, though I am lacking, allow me to walk the rest of my life with you. Will you be my wife?" At his heartfelt proposal, Njeri cried endlessly. A deep love and respect for Silas had already taken root in her heart. His hidden tenderness behind his strength, his warm consideration concealed within his bluntness, and his courage in standing against all the world's prejudice and threats to protect her. All of this was more precious to her than anything in the world. With a tear-streaked face, she smiled brightly and took his hand. "Yes, Silas, if it weren't for you, I can't even imagine what would have become of me. You saved my life and gave me a new one. You are my savior and the person I love and respect most in this world. I will gladly be your wife. If I can spend the rest of my life by your side, I could ask for nothing more." A few days later, under a clear autumn sky, a small wedding was held in the front yard of Silas's log cabin. The only guests were Hazel, who had stood by Silas his whole life, Dr. Evans and his wife, who had helped them in every way, and Silas's son and his family, who were now their staunchest allies, along with their young grandchildren. Nyeri wore a simple, beautiful white dress. Over her shoulders, she draped a vibrantly colored kanga scarf, the only memento she had brought from Kenya. It seemed to symbolize her past, present, and future. Silas stood next to her in an awkward suit, something he had never worn in his life. His face was filled with shyness and a deep happiness. There was no justice of the peace, no fancy music, no expensive food. Instead, Dr. Evans gave a warm speech blessing their future, and Hazel organized a potluck for the guests. Silas's young grandchildren sang a song they knew from school, making everyone burst into laughter. The couple exchanged simple gold bands pledging their unchanging love and respect with tear-filled eyes. It was a moment more genuine and moving than any grand wedding. After the ceremony, a simple feast was held in the yard. Lavish dishes of Kenyan nyama choma, which Silas had painstakingly prepared overnight, sat alongside classic American potluck dishes like potato salad and cornbread. Sharing the special food, a blend of American and African flavors, the guests sincerely blessed the couple's future. After the wedding, Jerry was no longer an unstable migrant worker on Silas Blackwood's farm. She was Silas Blackwood's wife and the dignified lady of this vast mountain farm. Though she had gained legal stability, little else changed. She still woke at dawn to head to the fields with her husband and was not afraid to sweat in the earth. She took care of the household with even more dedication. Learning from Hazel how to can vegetables and bake bread, honing her homemaking skills. With her characteristically bright and positive personality, she reached out to the townsfolk first, trying to communicate sincerely. The people who were initially awkward and wary gradually opened their hearts to her unchanging sincerity and kindness, and seeing how she and Silas cherished and loved each other, they began to accept her as a warm neighbor. Silas also changed noticeably after the wedding. He often showed a bright smile he had never worn before, and he became much more talkative. His voice when calling his wife was filled with a sweetness, and he showed a new tenderness, massaging her shoulders in the fields and asking if she was tired. His once lonely log cabin was now filled with his wife's bright laughter, the smell of delicious food, and the warm love they shared, transforming into a vibrant and happy space beyond comparison. As the spring sun caressed the new potato sprouts and the deep green of summer covered the mountains, and a bountiful golden autumn arrived once more, an incredibly precious and miraculous gift came to Silas and Jerry. Jerry was pregnant. The fact that he was becoming a father for the first time in his mid-60s left Silas overjoyed and at the same time dazed with disbelief. He asked Jerry several times if he had heard correctly, and only when she nodded with a shy smile did he finally jump up and down like a child. He carefully lifted Jerry, spun her around, and shouted, "I'm gonna be a father! I'm gonna be a father!" His face overflowed with a pure joy and emotion he had never felt in his life. From that day on, Silas cared for Jerry as if she were a fragile glass vessel. He forbade her from doing even slightly strenuous work. Not just field work, but he took over the housework himself, telling Jerry to just rest comfortably and think happy thoughts. Every morning, he went up the mountain to gather fresh huckleberries and mushrooms, and he scoured every market in the region to find all sorts of food said to be good for her. Every night before sleep, he would massage her feet with warm water, and he would gently place his ear on her belly, speaking to the baby inside in his deep, low voice. "Hey there, little one, can you hear your daddy's voice? Just grow up healthy. This old daddy will give you everything in the world." His devotion brought Njeri immense happiness and emotion. Dr. Evans now became the couple's family doctor and a reliable family friend. He made regular trips up the mountain to their home, meticulously checking Njeri's health and the baby's development. Both Njeri and the baby were healthy. There had been concerns about Silas's age, but thanks to a lifetime of healthy living in the mountains, he was diagnosed as having no problems. Dr. Evans reassured him. "Silas, I knew you were spry, but I didn't know you were this spry. The baby is growing very well, so don't you worry." Hazel also cared for Njeri as if she were her own daughter. She meticulously taught her about old-timey advice for pregnancy and shared folk remedies. Sometimes they would cook Njeri's favorite Kenyan dishes together, soothing her loneliness. The townsfolk, too, now congratulated them on their pregnancy with genuine hearts and without prejudice. The news that a new life was being born in the mountain community, where the cry of a baby had become rare, was a great celebratory event for everyone. People would congratulate the couple whenever they met and brought gifts of fresh vegetables, fruits, and organic meats. Time passed, and the harsh winter of the Rockies arrived. The mountains were covered in deep snow, and a fierce wind howled through the valley. One night, though her due date was still a little way off, Njeri suddenly went into labor. Silas panicked, but calmly contacted Dr. Evans. However, a record-breaking blizzard overnight had completely closed the only mountain road to town. They were in a helpless, isolated situation where they couldn't get to the hospital and Dr. Evans couldn't make a house call. Silas's face turned white, and Njeri groaned in pain, trembling with anxiety. Then, like a miracle, Hazel appeared at their house, having braved the blizzard on a snowmobile. She had experience delivering several of her own children and had often acted as a de facto midwife for urgent births in the area. "Silas, get a grip. Don't you worry. I'm here, honey. You be strong too." Hazel's loud, calm voice gave great strength to the terrified Silas and Njeri. Silas's spacious log cabin instantly became a tense makeshift delivery room. Following Hazel's instructions, Silas boiled hot water and prepared clean towels, fidgeting nervously, while Hazel expertly assisted with the birth. After several long, arduous hours of struggle, just as dawn was breaking, a lusty baby's cry shattered the white silence of the snow-covered world and echoed through the mountain valley. Njeri had safely given birth to a healthy daughter. The baby had inherited her mother's dark, radiant skin and her father's distinct, strong features in equal measure. Silas looked down at the small, precious life crying vigorously in his arms and shed uncontrollable hot tears. His rough, coarse face was filled with a sense of wonder and complete happiness he had never felt before. He gently stroked the baby's tiny finger with his own thick one and whispered, "My baby, my daughter. Thank you for coming into this world. Thank you so much." As the blizzardy winter night passed, a warm morning of hope dawned on the valley with the birth of a new life. The baby was named Sky, embodying Silas's long-held wish. Though he had spent his life looking only at the ground, he now hoped that this precious life that had come to him would soar freely through the world, as clear and boundless as the high blue skies of Idaho. Sky's birth was more than just a joy for one family. It was a blessing that breathed new life and hope into the long stagnant mountain community. The townsfolk rejoiced as if she were their own, visiting Silas's house. So often they wore a path to his door, bearing gifts of baby clothes, handmade blankets, and toys. The once silent log cabin was now a bustling gathering place filled with the baby's bright laughter and the warm presence of people. For Sky's first birthday, the entire town seemed to gather for a potluck to celebrate and wish for the child's health and happiness. Silas's son and his family now came to visit their granddaughter every weekend, making the long journey without complaint. Seeing the grandfather Silas hold the infant with awkward but affectionate hands, and the stepmother Njeri watch her husband with a warm smile, they came to a new understanding of the true meaning of family. The once strained father-son relationship melted away as naturally as spring snow in the presence of the lovely connection that was Sky. The years flowed by like a river. Sky, growing up in the clear air of Idaho, surrounded by the deep love of her parents and the warm care of the community, became a healthy and bright girl of 6 or 7. The child freely mixed the Swahili she learned from her mother and the English she learned from her father, chattering away. Her dark skin and bright clear eyes added a mysterious charm. Sky ran through the mountains and fields as if they were her own home, befriending squirrels and deer, knowing the names of all the wildflowers that bloomed each season, and often pretended to harvest potatoes alongside her father. Silas still farmed potatoes, but he no longer buried himself in work as before. His greatest joy was the time he spent with his beloved wife Njeri and his precious daughter Sky. After finishing his work in the fields, he would give Sky a piggyback ride around the property, tell her old stories at night, and take the family to the town fair. The shadow of solitude was gone from his face, replaced by the warm, benevolent smile of a grandfather. Njeri was now perfectly adapted to American life. She still helped her husband in the fields, but her role had expanded. She became renowned for her canned goods and pies, sharing them with the community. The Kenyan food she made became a special delicacy at town potlucks. Based on her own experiences, she willingly helped other immigrants facing struggles, acting as an interpreter or counselor, becoming their reliable friend and mentor. Her bright, positive energy and warm heart had a good influence on many people, transcending borders and cultures. She was no longer a recipient of aid, but a dignified member of the community who contributed and lived together with others. Hazel still ran her general store, playing the role of the family's godmother. Dr. Evans remained the reliable doctor who cared for the community's health. Silas's son and his family now visited frequently, and Sky grew up showered with love from all sides. Word came that Bert, who had tormented them in the past, had been brought to justice and lost his farm after all his illegal activities were exposed. Travis, repenting his past mistakes, was now living as a diligent farmer and sometimes helped with Silas's work. The conflicts and wounds of the past faded with time, replaced by mutual understanding, forgiveness, and a warm sense of community solidarity. Silas's old but cozy log cabin was no longer the solitary fortress of one individual. It had become a living, breathing home where people with different wounds and backgrounds met, overcame adversity through the power of love, and wrote a new history of hope in solidarity with warm neighbors. In the evenings, the smell of savory beef stew and the exotic spices of a Kenyan curry would waft from the chimney together, and the yard would be filled with the endless sound of Sky's cheerful laughter, mixed with the friendly chatter of Swahili and English. The miraculous love story that began in a high valley of the Rocky Mountains became living proof that true understanding, love, and solidarity are possible, transcending the rugged mountains and all the world's prejudices and barriers. It would echo for a long time in people's hearts as a warm and hopeful memory. The story of Silas and Njeri and Sky is not over yet. Their lives will continue to flow as colorfully as the beautiful 4 seasons of Idaho, and perhaps new trials and challenges will come their way. But they are no longer alone. Holding each other's hands firmly together with their warm neighbors, they are ready to face any difficulty with love and faith. Their very existence was proof of hope itself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and like.